So we are here today with Elizabeth Vega of lulobalife.wordpress.com, the blog, where she discusses the beginning of life, end of life, as well as a lot of her other personal experiences. You speak very openly about the daughter that you lost. So could you tell us a little bit about, maybe read us an excerpt or tell us the story of Gabrielle?
Sure. How about if I read it? Can I read it?
Yes.
This is called And I Will Sing You Lullaby. When I think about it all, it seems fresh and yet far away, like someone else lived that experience, but it's me who carries the weight and grace of the story. 14 years and just yesterday squeezed into 16 spring days. I think that's what I remember most. I woke up in the ordinary, then suddenly, in an instant, my entire world shifts. Everything around me looks the same but feels different. Change is like that, like wind sneaking up on a box and tossing it in the air, or it can also be beautiful and unexpected, like precious things carried in broken bowls. In the days before my daughter's birth, an abnormal ultrasound flipped my world upside down. I scrambled to pick up pieces. For days, I listened to a parade of doctors, each armed with a case study. They would stand by my bed, clear their throat, and say, "We saw a case just like this." They then presented an ambiguous offering of information that brushed against the grain of the physician who had come before. One would say, "We put a shunt in and they were fine." The other case study had zero quality of life. While they spoke with authority, they offered few certainties. In the cacophony of medical voices, I chose to hear the hushed tones of an operating room broken by my daughter's cry a full 20 minutes after she was pulled from my body. Confident that souls are endlessly wise, we trusted our daughter to choose for herself. We asked she not be resuscitated. Our medical staff honored our wishes. I know it was difficult for them to put aside everything they had been trained to do and simply step back. Then a miracle. Gabrielle went from blue and lifeless to coming to life in her father's arms. She was content and sucking a bottle an hour later. More doctors with more bad news came 24 hours later. Gabrielle was born with a fast-growing brain tumor. The part of her brain not consumed by the tumor had been crushed by fluid. She had less than a fourth of her brain. The prognosis was grim. She would have a non-stop reflex called a neurological cry. She would be in a vegetative state. Nevertheless, options were offered. Surgery could be performed, although it offered only a 5% chance of survival. Chemotherapy would mean there would be a 99% chance she would be completely brain dead. The decision was mine, like playing God with a blindfold on. I chose to put medical science aside. When in the dark, your heart is a reliable compass. The heart sees things the mind doesn't. I saw the intensity of my daughter's gaze. Only 2 days old, Gabrielle would study my face. Our eyes would lock, and something small and quiet was exchanged. Yes, my daughter was in fact dying, but she was also living now. We would celebrate her life for as long as we had her. We brought her magnolia blossoms and music. Only 5 and 7, her brothers Chris and Joey were told in clear and honest terms about her condition so they could actively participate in her life. In the way children often do, they lived moment to moment and piloted through each emotion as it came. They sang "Firefly, Firefly" to her. Their crystal voices rose around her as they sang, "Let your night light shine with a magic glow. Fly on and let it glimmer everywhere you go." Aware of the medicinal power of sugar, the boys insisted Gabrielle be allowed to taste cotton candy and peaches. Her dad showed her colors and played her music. I sang her lullabies and read her poetry. My daughter, with only a fourth of her brain, responded in kind. She used every ounce of spirit within her to reach up and touch my face. Soulful living also means dignity in dying. I asked to take Gabrielle home. My doctors argued removing her shunt would mean she would die in days instead of weeks. But how will she die? They told me she would get a fever and become septic. She would never leave the hospital. And what if we let nature take its course? What then? The tumor would cause fluid and pressure to build in her brain. Gabrielle would drift off to sleep and never wake up. I was put in the wrenching position of choosing the best death for my child. I chose grace, dignity, gentleness, and love, and asked for hospice. The day before Gabrielle died, I took her to the park so she could feel the wind and sunshine on her face. Sitting on a park bench with Gabrielle in my arms and my sons playing on the swings, I realized I was swimming in life's waters, immersed in both deep sadness and profound joy. My boys would swing, jump off, and run to give their sister a kiss. Other children came by to admire the new baby. I was content, even in my sorrow. The sky was a beautiful blue. Gabrielle's time was fleeting, but it was still a last good day. That night, her father and I just took turns holding her. I sang her lullabies. Instead of rocking her to sleep, I was gently rocking her to the other side. Tears down my face, I sang, golden slumbers kiss your eyes, smiles await you when you rise. Sleep, pretty baby, do not cry. And I will sing you a lullaby, lullaby, lullaby. In the beginning, it was so hard. I was so angry. I felt like a town crier shouting unfair through the streets. Grief was physical. I had a perpetual lump in my throat. There were no shortcuts. All I could do was walk through it. Living was an act of faith, like planting seeds in the cracks of my heart and praying for rain. My arms ached with the need to hold her. I thought I would never laugh again. But even in the midst of my most visceral sorrow, memories of magnolia blossoms, cotton candy, and park swings sustained me. I now live out the lessons my baby daughter taught me in just 16 days. I love without fear. I have faced death and have come out on the other side with the empowering knowledge, the joy of loving another human being for any length of time outweighs the void that is left when they are gone. I am confident in my own resilience. I felt all the pieces of my broken heart. I thought they would spill out on the floor, but they didn't. We humans are naturally equipped to face loss. All those cracks and fissures have turned into canyons where more love can reside. I now comprehend the tenuous balance of knowing when to hold on and when and how to let go. I embrace life and also accept that I will most certainly die. And when my time comes to say goodbye, because it will come, I know I have a choice. I can fight, or I can face it with courage and love and accept it in all the breath of its bitter sweetness, with the gentleness and grace of a lullaby. You know, I was like 25 when I was going through that, and people were like, how did you know? And it was, I think it was twofold. I was with my first dying patient when I was 16 because I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of elders, and my childhood was a little crazy and chaotic, and I knew the only way that I was going to survive was to go outside of my home to get what I needed. And so I was a very strange kid. I struck up many friendships with elders, would just show up on their door and just be like, hey. And because hanging out with elders, you were already introduced to that end stage of life, you know. And so from there, I had a comfort with death. And then when I had the experience with my daughter, it was just acting from a place of love and like knowing that she was going to die and then asking the question, well, then how? And I think that that's as human beings, that's how we need to navigate these. When we, we're in a complex technological world where there are many miracles that are offered to us, technological miracles, and each one of us wants our own and wants them to work. That's why we have like 89-year-olds with Alzheimer's disease and, weakened bodies attached to ventilators, because families can't let go. And they've not accepted the, yes, we will die, and have moved to the question, well, how will we die? Because when we ask that question, it shifts the conversation.
Yeah.
Asking my doctors, how will she die? I mean, it's an obvious choice. Either you're in the hospital and you're stuck and you get a fever and you're septic, or you spend your last day on a park bench. It's an obvious choice.
Right.
So, I mean, I think for me, I had some medical knowledge, and I had been in the medical system since I was like 16. So I was empowered to not just accept the moving train that's the medical system and ask questions. And asking that question, well, okay, how will she die? In such direct terms, gave me the power to make the decisions that I needed to make for her from a place of dignity and love.
A lot of the people I know who have had that experience, they don't want to heal. It's like if I don't feel constantly sad, or I don't feel, if I'm not constantly in pain about it, then I'm not doing justice to the one that I've lost.
Memory.
Right, to the memory.
And it's hard. It's so hard. I remember like that moment when I realized that I hadn't thought about her for a day or two, right? And the guilt that came with that, But there's a point where you do have to just sort of relinquish it and understand that, the memory lives on in your heart, and it's, it's in your bones and your DNA, it's just there. And, moving from Louisville, Kentucky, where my daughter is buried, to St. Louis, Missouri, I worried about the fact that, her grave was going to be there and I was going to be here. But realizing that, she's with me always, and she's in the work that I do. And now that I have grandchildren, holding those grandchildren and seeing the continuation of that. And I think that that's what's part of the problem in our society, is that because we don't talk about death, we also do not know how to resiliently grieve.
Right. Which
3
is so
days
important.
bereavement, and nobody talks about it anymore. But there's a resilience that we get when we grieve as individuals and also in community.
Right.
So that's why I do like Community Dia de los Muertos altars, like I did one this past, November with BJC Hospice. And it was a big community altar that had marigold blossoms and candles and candy skulls and pictures, and we allowed people to write the names of their loved ones on a butterfly. And just that simple act of tracing that loved one's name on a butterfly, some people cried, some people told stories, but they did it in community. And I had a 17-year-old who lost her father a year before, and she wrote his name on a butterfly, and she said that it was the first time in a year that she had been allowed to grieve in community.
Wow.
And I thought, man, that's just a shame that we're at this place where we think that grief, yes, it is an individual experience, but because so many people have experienced it, it should also be community. It should be part of our community collective, and it's a reaching back and reaching forward of, I can now tell mothers who have lost children, it's going to suck in the beginning. Your arms are going to ache. You're going to kind of feel this way, but there's going to be a time where the edges will be smoothed off.
Well, I've been to the water where I took my drink. Help me. And where I found myself. Been so long since I told my story to anyone else but me. But then I look at all these children here, and my soul, they won't let me be. So I give you all the benefit of my vast experience. It don't take no concentration, but just a little bit of common sense. So I tell you, my head high, my memory be longer than yours. My head high, my pride be stronger than yours. My head high, my memory be longer than yours. My head high, I've been down.
I believe that how we grieve and how we approach the end of life ultimately determines how we live our lives. And I also think that, if you look at like birth and you look at death, we are very ill-equipped at both. Even though we have all this technology, we have, what we've created is an entire generation of people who fully expect that they're going to give birth without any pain at all, and that they're going to also die without any suffering or pain at all. And, well, I think that, suffering is part of the human experience. And I know I might get a lot of flack for saying this, but I think that it's part of one of those inevitable truths that, we will be born. We will suffer at points in between heartache, despair, disappointment, grief, and then we will also die. But what has happened is that as a society, we're quick fix. We want everything. We want our birth, scheduled C-section. We want our food fast, and we want our dying to be quick. And that's to our detriment, because every experience from childbirth to our childhood fall, to our first heartbreak, to our first experience with the death of a loved one, to our bodies no longer complying with our will, are all preparations for dying well. And so, and the medical establishment is just part implicit in this, in this system. And most recently, I was screaming when I heard this, was that, the American Psychiatric Association, DSM manual, did something several years back, and that was that they removed the grief exclusion from the definition of depression.
Get out.
This was an exclusion that was in place for 30 years, and it differentiated the sadness of sorrow from the pain of depression. And what it means is that now we can prescribe medications to people who are grieving 2 weeks out from their grief experience.
Wow.
And and it's like we only mourn that which we love. And even this must be squeezed into narrow parameters and a time frame. And what do we lose when we do that? We lose our natural capacity for resilience. Because navigating grief, while hard, while difficult, while sucking at times, helps us become stronger, more resilient human beings. And as we get older and we age, we learn how to navigate all the losses that come with that experience. And we're ill-equipped. We want the quick pill, and we lose something in that. And so when it comes time to die, of course we're terrified. We know that there's nothing that can be really done to, help that, and we don't have the skills or coping to navigate it, because our entire life is preparation for that. 14 or 15 years after my daughter died, I'm unexpectedly standing on the top of a Swiss mountain, a place that I'd never navigated to go, and wasn't even on my bucket list, but I was standing at the top of the Swiss mountain that was literally up on top of the world. And at that moment, in this place that I'd never intended to arrive at, it was the most beautiful place that I'd ever seen. It was almost like I reached down inside of myself and traced those deep, tender places. And I felt those. I felt living in a transitional shelter when I was in my 20s. I felt, the pain and heartache of an abusive childhood. I felt the loss of my daughter, and it was like I was tracing that. And that was when I inhaled and soaked in the joy in equal measure to being carved out. I was a vessel at that point. But you have to allow yourself to be carved out. You have to allow yourself to feel that. And, I know that with my daughter, they, a month, maybe 2 months into my grieving process, they were offering me antidepressants. And I was just like, if I cannot be sad and sorrowful when I bury my child, when can I be? What it meant is that by allowing myself, instead of medicating myself, stealing myself through it, I was able to just walk through it with openness and feel. And I came out on the other side stronger, more resilient, with an immense capacity to love without fear, and a stronger commitment to live my life in the moment, So, people are like, how do you live your life the way that you do, doing all this stuff? Because I allowed myself to feel that loss.
What do you think is the first step towards getting out of grief or grieving?
One of the things that I did when I was grieving my daughter was I would allow myself to feel it for a very specific amount of time. So, when those grief moments came, and I call them the Mack truck grief moments, where you're just tootling through life and then all of a sudden something happens and you're just sort of buckled by that experience of that memory coming back. Or, it happens in very subtle ways. You kind of reach for the phone to call somebody who's no longer there, or you see something and it triggers that memory and you feel that sadness. And our initial reaction is, oh, I'm not going to feel this. But I would let myself feel it. And I would just feel it. And I would cry it out. I would not hold it in. I would cry it out. And then what I would do is I would do an actual tangible act. And I would do something for my community in the name of my daughter. Some intentional act of kindness. It may be like, oh, I see somebody on the street and I'm going to give them a ride. And that's going to be my way of reaching back and reaching forward. Or, I would offer to babysit somebody's child. Something that would not deny my grief experience, but would plug me into my collective community. And it was really empowering, and it was so empowering that now when I help people write letters to their loved ones saying goodbye, one of the things that I include in that is I have the person who is dying, I say, can you give them 2 or 3 things, specific things that you want them to do when they're feeling sad and missing you? And it can be something that connects you to that person's memory. You connect them to a memory or something that you shared. And so the person that was getting ready to die would give, grief assignments to those who are going to be left behind. And so I think it's really important that it's both allowing yourself to feel that experience and feel what that's about, and then transform that into emotion that turns into a specific act. And that sort of pushes you not beyond the grief, but gives you the momentum through it. And understand that there are going to be moments that you're going to feel it. 2 years out, 4 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out. And the other thing is that you are not going to be the same person that you were before the loss. It's a transformation. It doesn't mean that you're going to be perpetually sad. It may mean that you're going to even be better. But that void is always going to be there. You know, it's just a transform. You sort of integrate the loss into your new normal. It's a new normal. And so I think that that's where a lot of the sadness and, you know, because to me, the difference between depression and mourning is that mourning is active. Mourning is like, there's momentum there. Depression is sort of when you're stuck. So if you, no matter what it is, if you're depressed and you try to turn that depression into an act of mourning, then that transforms that experience. And so, you know, when you're sad, it's like, what am I mourning? What am I grieving? And then how can I then integrate that experience of loss into my life, not deny it, but move forward with it? You know, we're rough and tumble. We are designed as human beings for the rough and tumble existence of the human experience. We are designed for that. And so we need to trust that, and we need to stop looking for quick fixes and ways to get around it, and just accept the fact that we learn lessons journeying through it. And it's through. It's not a stopping place.
Right. We at Uranus is Blue hope that you enjoyed this episode with Elizabeth Vega, the Mistress of Death. Very special thanks to our cast of Uranus is Blue: Chris Pittman, the Earthly Indie Superintendent; Molly, the backup to the backup; Maleka Salam, the Griot; Fathom 9, the Magician; and our wingman, Monica Fouché. If you enjoyed what you heard on Uranus is Blue and would like to hear more from Uranus, please subscribe to this channel.